Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I am Brian Calley, President and CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan. And with me is Sarah. I was thinking, Sarah, as I was waiting to go live there, that what would it take for some cue-in music or something, like a small business briefing jingle? I don't know, it might be too high production, but welcome. It's kind of nice. Feels almost balmy out there today.
It is. It's not a negative. It says 27 on my computer right now, so I'll take some sunshine and above zero temps for a few days. I'm gonna have to research the intro music. All I know is you don't want me to sing. I can't sing. I'm not a musician, so maybe you might have to write something, Brian, for the intro on the piano. We'll see.
Maybe a jingle for our sponsor, the Marana.
Yes, the Marana Group. So as you all know, we're very thankful to have Marana Group as our sponsor. They offer a full line of solutions designed to get your company's message into the right hands in a timely and cost-effective manner. So if you're considering anything in the near future with data, documents, or distribution, you should definitely check out Marana Group's offerings. So Brian, speaking of distribution, I wanted to let you know that I did receive my at-home COVID tests in the mail on Saturday. So I had pledged that I would order my at-home test when they were made available on the government website. I did that, and sure enough, they did arrive to my home on Saturday. So how about you? Have you received any yet?
Nothing yet, although I know what you experienced, and some other friends actually reached out to about a half a dozen people, and several had received their tests in the last couple of days. What was interesting about it, though, was that the tests are coming. There's like a bubble wrap and a rubber band around it, and then in the package and mailed out, which is when you consider that there's 500 million of these being mailed out, that seems awfully manual to do. When I was in politics, we'd have these parties where friends and family would come over and help with envelope stuffing, and even like 250 envelopes is like a lot, for the stamping and sticking and sealing and folding and so forth. And to think about like 500 million of these where there's bubble wrap, and then there's a whole thing about plastic and the ocean and everything. I wouldn't have guessed that they would have gone with this type of an option, but it was weird. It seemed very, it looks very amateur in how it's like packaged, and maybe a little bit of overkill. But I suppose that the U.S. Post Office needed a shot in the arm of funding. They've been running at a deficit, so maybe this was just a way to transfer some money over to the post office.
Who knows? I can confirm I did have bubble wrap and a rubber band. I will try to reuse those instead of filling up the landfill further. So, well, let's get on to the show today. It is Monday, and so as always, we like to start off with Data Monday and a look at the trends happening here in Michigan and around the country.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the slides, and really more of the same compared to what we have seen in recent weeks. So we do see the nation as a whole has definitely started to come down. So we see a really sharp increase here and a sharp decline that pretty much matches the increase, which is similar to what we had seen in other places that were ahead of the United States. Really sharp 3-week increase in the United Kingdom, in South Africa, and then the decline pretty quickly as well. If you zoom in, though, on the last 90 days, you can see a little more clearly what has been happening, and let there be no mistake. 3 weeks ago we were saying it looks like we're probably about crested, or getting, the increases were slowing down, and it's going down, and it's going down pretty much everywhere. If we look at all the different regions, the Northeast is the one that got the highest, and now has come back down quite a bit, about 2/3 of its peak. But if you look across the Midwest and the West even now, where they're coming down. So looks like a really strong indication at this point that the experience in the United States is real similar to what was experienced in other places. If you look at hospitalizations, again, across the United States, you'll see there's definitely a crest and a decline that has started there, still very high. So hospitalizations nationwide over 150,000, and that still exceeds the previous high from a year ago in the winter. But the trend heading in the same direction. And one other thing to keep in mind with hospitalization is that most states are not separating out those who are hospitalized and found to have COVID, but they're hospitalized for another reason, and those who are hospitalized because of COVID, which kind of skews these numbers a bit. Looking though at the last 90 days, you can see definitely, each day's reporting has been below the 7-day average for over a week now. So that means that average is still declining, and of course we would expect that as the cases drop so quickly. Looking at Michigan, you'll see that it's been a little bit of a messy curve going up, long-term gradual curve, and then sharp with kind of a dual Omicron and Delta wave that were kind of one right after another, but clearly declining now in Michigan also. The hospitalization is that's the place in Michigan where you see the the Delta wave cresting just as Omicron took over, and so you see kind of this two-peak increase at this time, and still pretty high. But now our hospitalizations are now back below the previous highs of the beginning of the pandemic, and we had a couple of peaks in between. So Michigan now has had 4 surges that affected hospitalizations, but now back below those peaks, and appears to be dropping. Now looking at, this is the United Kingdom, and the reason I wanted to show this is because I think it's starting to give us a clue, though, that that with Omicron, at least for a while, we're going to see numbers settle down in a higher place. So you see a really sharp decline, and then still declining, but declining much, much more slowly than before. Looking at the last 90 days for the United Kingdom, you'll see that it got up to new highs, and then it came down to below 100,000 cases a day for the country as a whole, and it's still trending down some, but not so fast. And this, historically speaking, is still a really high level for that country. And so this might be a clue here in Michigan that, yeah, we're going to see our cases cut in half, but maybe there'll be a floor in how low it gets, as opposed to before when it got really, really low. That may be part of this kind of endemic phase that a growing number of epidemiologists believe that we're entering into, is getting closer. That this particular wave, and then another variant coming out of Omicron, which maybe is going to keep the numbers a little higher, a little bit longer, but still really kind of signaling this phase of the pandemic, hopefully close to the end. So generally, I'd say good news across the board. The hospitalizations have been the concern the whole time, not necessarily the infection rates, because it's a different type of virus than it was in the beginning. But just law of large numbers kicking in, and more vulnerable populations impacted. But hospitals definitely need this decline to continue, because even though, as you can see from those peaks, that it's lower, but still, when you have 3,500 or more inpatients, where they're managing COVID spread and all the things that come along with disease control in hospitals, it's very, very difficult to operate under these circumstances. So while there still is no signal at all that the governor is considering any additional rules or mandates on business and business operations in connection with epidemic emergency powers, still the hospital systems themselves clearly under strain, a lot of turnover in staff and shortages in a lot of critical areas. So bringing these numbers down, hopefully it will continue as we've seen in other places, and get the hospitals back to a more manageable level of inpatient services.
Well, I did sneak a quick peek while you were giving your presentation to look at today's numbers on the state of Michigan's website. And over the weekend, which we do know tends to have a lower case count than later in the week, just over 21,000 for the 3-day period. So that is definitely lower than what we've been seeing. So hopefully that decline does continue. So, all right, let's talk about the situation in Russia and Ukraine, certainly dominating a lot of the headline space these days. But let's talk about what economic risks we face here in the United States, given the uncertainty unfolding there.
One thing that we have to keep in mind in situations like this is that everything's interconnected. So it's not necessarily that Russia has amassed 100,000 troops at the Ukraine border that creates risk for the business environment here in the United States. It's more the disruptions and the possibility of sanctions that could impact things, especially in the energy sector. So while the United States does not buy a lot of oil directly from Russia, if there were sanctions put in place, then just the overall, there's a good chance that the overall cost of energy would increase. And so that's an example of the type of thing that could have a ripple impact on business across the globe. Now, obviously, we are not foreign policy experts. You know what the right decision is and how to deal with the situation between Russia and Ukraine is not. It's not the sort of thing that we would even opine on. But we do believe that there's potential for some both disruptions and also volatility in a lot of different markets around the globe in ways that could affect people. Certainly, I think we should expect that if there are sanctions used, that there would be some kind of ripple impacts that would be felt across the whole globe, of course, including in the United States of America. So there are some risks out there with it, and it might seem remote, but as we saw with the pandemic, that things not working right anywhere in the world can impact things back home. And so this is a risk, one that there's frankly not much directly we can do about it except for to plan for and expect, kind of harden yourself and your systems for some volatility, and think about supply chains and things that you rely on and how they might be directly or indirectly impacted on it. But we wouldn't want to, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't point out or suggest that that as this comes to a head, if Russia doesn't pull back and sanctions are used, then the possibility for some additional volatility and what has really been a volatile and difficult start to the year in so many different ways, that the potential for that to increase or get a little worse is certainly there.
All right, let's bring it back closer to home here. I know last week we did cover the governor's proposed tax proposal that she talked about in her State of the State, but there's quite a few others kind of floating around at the state level. So which ones are gaining traction?
So there's a lot of things that are on the table, and there's a few bigger themes that I thought we could talk about today. So kind of famously, the governor had said, want to end the retirement tax. We don't really have a retirement tax in Michigan. We have an income tax, and it's a matter of what levels and types of income get exempt from the income tax. And that's really what she was talking about, is increasing the exemptions for retirement income. And so that's one where there is, across the board, you're going to find, Republicans and Democrats that like the idea of doing that, but the details matter a lot. it used to be that there were different rules for public pensions, private pensions, 401ks, and also seniors that were still working. So the idea of going back to the old system, it does invite some disparate treatment between types of retirement income. I think it's more likely that they look at something where it's just a higher amount of senior income, no matter where its source is, would be exempted. I'd be surprised if there weren't something done in that sphere. It'll be our goal, though, in this to put on the table for consideration at the same time that when a business owner sells their business, that in many cases that is their retirement. And so we're going to really push this concept of as long as you're exempting other types of retirement, you should exempt the sale of a business, which is the retirement nest egg for small business owners. And that would be in capital gains area, which is a little different than regular earned income or retirement income. So anyway, that's one area and how I think for small business owners could potentially be impacted. Some of the others, the earned income tax credit. Now this wouldn't be for businesses, but for workers of businesses, and SBAM, and also the Grand Rapids Chamber, for example, has a history of supporting an increase in the earned income tax credit. This essentially gives lower income workers a refundable tax credit. And it's the idea of rewarding people for working, even if they are doing so at jobs that are lower income, like entry level type jobs. And given the labor force participation rate being lower and all the problems that we've had with programs disincentivizing work, this is one that actually rewards those who go to work. So that's one thing. I think some kind of adjustment in the earned income tax credit is also fairly likely to make it through. Whether or not I don't think it'll be exactly what the governor proposed, but something in that area. Now the Senate Republicans have put on the table a broad-based rate reduction. So to take all business taxes and income taxes to 3.9%. So the way it works today is you got a corporate income tax that's now at 6%. They have an individual income tax, and pass-through companies like S corporations and LLCs file there. The idea is you take that from, and that's at 4.25%. So they want to move everything down to 3.9. So C corporations, S corporations, sole proprietors, LLCs and partnerships, and regular earned income, all at 3.9%. That's what the overall concept that the Senate's put on the table. Now, ongoing revenue to the state of Michigan, it's a bigger bite. It's a couple $2 billion, and so I think they'll probably get some pushback from the governor on that. Although I haven't heard that explicitly yet, but the governor's tax cut proposals are more modest in total size, and a lot more than the idea of a broad-based across-the-board rate cut. Now, there was another option put on the table, came from the House Republicans, and that would be to eliminate the commercial personal property tax. So this would be the property tax on commercial equipment. So the property tax on the industrial equipment was phased out. So this would phase out or would eliminate the personal property tax on things like shelves, or like this office furniture in here. There's personal property tax that is paid on office equipment, on computers, on shelving, cash registers, and like anything for a commercial business that you own is on your personal property tax. It's a little bit more complicated because most of that revenue goes to local government. So for the state to do the cut, but the extra revenue is at state government, and the cut would hit local government. So that's a little bit more complicated to pull off, and how you make sure that local governments can still pay their bills. But that's another big issue on the table. So across the board, there are I think good possibilities here that we will come out of the other end of this with a better situation than what we have today in terms of long-term competitiveness. SBAM is open to variations of all these concepts and ideas. Some are more directly in our wheelhouse than others. Retirement income, for example, is not really something under the SBAM criteria of issues, but to the extent that there would be some recognition that business owners don't get a tax-free retirement when their main retirement nest egg is the sale of the business, and there's a big chunk that's taken out of it. In fact, what often happens is that residency, because you don't have any choice really, residency is established in one of the no income tax states before the sale of the business, because the differential on that one big transaction can make it worth it to do those sorts of things. So lots of possibilities that are on the table. We'll definitely keep you up to speed on it. I have talked to several members of the legislature who have indicated to me that there's not a desire to rush anything through. That you've got a whole process. You got the budget coming up. You got the legislative season between now and the summer, when they would normally finish up the first half of the year before they getting into the election season full bore. And so they plan on taking the next few months to really vet out these ideas. They have debates, and we'll see where it lands. But I think all the conditions are there for an actual tax cut, and they ought to do that, because in state government right now, there's so much more money than they've ever had. It is literally not possible for them to spend it all without wasting a lot. And so the idea that some of it would be given back makes a lot of sense. And by the way, one other thing is that I think it's somewhat likely we're going to get another deposit into the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. That's making its way through the process, another $250 million. Hopeful for that, because the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund is, it's got some deposits recently to start building up that balance, but it is nowhere near what it was pre-pandemic. And since the government used it in a different way during the pandemic, not just to replace income for people that businesses voluntarily laid off, but to really kind of force a bunch of layoffs and then the depletion of the fund over a very, very long period of time, it depleted the fund in a way that we hadn't seen since the Great Recession in Michigan, the first decade of the century. So having that change, or having some additional deposits, it really ought to have about $4 billion in it, and it's it got almost down to zero. Didn't actually have to do any long-term borrowing to make it through the pandemic, but that's only because it was one of the healthiest trust funds in the country going into the pandemic. But it's definitely in skinny shape right now, and it does need to be rebuilt. So we will continuously look for opportunities to do that, so as to avoid assessments being made on unemployment insurance to cost to our members.
So continuing the unemployment thread here, there's a class action lawsuit that has been filed against the state regarding the unemployment system. So like you said, we've covered the issues with this system. We've talked about the various challenges. So what is the latest in regard to this lawsuit?
A lawsuit has been filed as a class action lawsuit. And the idea here is that you have the state made eligibility determinations, and kind of famously now covered the audit and how many claims were paid over and above, and there was some organized crime, there was fraud, there were all kinds of issues. But one of those issues were people who applied and did so in good faith, were awarded a certain amount, and then the state came back later and said, oops, we accidentally overpaid you, pay back. And those are the claimants that have filed a lawsuit. And the lawsuit names the Michigan Unemployment Insurance Agency and its director, Julia Dale. By the way, Julia Dale is new in the job, so it's like, welcome to the job. Here's your lawsuit. But it's but that is in some of the writing, this lawsuit, it was an example I thought illustrated the situation pretty well. And in this case, it was a self-employed person, a wedding photographer, applied for benefits at the start of the pandemic. Remember, the sole proprietors were able to file for benefits. Normally they can't, but under the emergency declaration, they could. So the agency determined that she was that in this case, this wedding photographer was eligible for $362 in benefits weekly. That happened back in April of 2020, and in October 2021. So this is, a year and 4 or 5 months later, the agency issued a notice for redetermination and said that she should have been paid $160 a week, not $362. And so was told she overpaid $14,000. And so it's those types of cases. There are several criminal cases that are happening right now where people that were caught cheating and stealing, and like I said, sometimes literally organized crime. That was in one case, one of these early criminal cases, somebody was working as a contractor inside state government and aiding these false claims. Really, really bad stuff that happened. In this case, though, no, these are cases where nobody's alleging fraud. Nobody's alleging anything was done in any kind of nefarious way. It was just a person who applied in good faith, was awarded in good faith, and then more than a year later said, hey, you were overpaid. You got to pay the money back. And that's how many of those there are out there, we don't know for sure, but I think this class action lawsuit is probably going to get a lot of action. And what are the remedies? That's not exactly clear what the potential remedies would be to this situation. But I don't think it's entirely unlikely that a court would find in these circumstances that the claimants would not have to pay back the money. So if that were determined, then another kind of just conjecture here, but it's hard for me to imagine the state carrying this all the way through. Once a court says, okay, you can give up, I think it's probably likely that the state would give up on it. But what we need to make sure is that doesn't mean that they turn around and assess our businesses for the lost money. And so there's a lot of interconnected things, and it's definitely a bum deal. What has happened to these people, and hopefully it will get resolved in a way that both is fair to the people who were who were apparently overpaid in good faith, but dealt with in a way that doesn't cost our members, who are still, many of them, many industries, trying to recover additional assessments.
All right, so we're going to continue on the lawsuit theme now and switch over to redistricting. There have been multiple lawsuits filed against the Redistricting Commission, but elections are already getting underway. So what are the next steps here?
There are now 3 lawsuits that are filed against redistricting. This is the process where these lines are redrawn for the legislative district, state house, state senate, congressional districts. And they're from both sides. You got a group of Republicans that are saying they're not fair for Republicans, and a group in Detroit, and then also more left-leaning organizations that are saying that these maps needed to lean more on the Democratic side. So there are 3 different lawsuits. The one that in again, not a lawyer, but I've been around the system for a while. The one that to me looks like it has the best case is the one that comes from Detroit current and previous legislators that say that the maps do not comply with the Voting Rights Act. And according to a traditional interpretation of the Voting Rights Act, there's no question that these maps do not comply. But what the Redistricting Commission is saying is, no, that traditional, how everybody's always looked at it in the past, we don't have to look at it that way. We've got a new way of looking at it. Well, how are courts going to decide on that? not exactly clear. But these races are already underway, and so it has to be decided pretty quickly. And there are issues that could be decided in federal court and in state court. How long it'll take for them to get sorted out, it's difficult to say now, but ultimately, I mean, really, in the next couple months, you reach a point of no return where you no longer can legitimately or realistically redraw lines. That you have to move forward with something. And so far, the lawsuits, the plaintiffs in the lawsuits haven't actually put forward alternative maps, although I do expect that that is probably in our future. And it will be fascinating to see what the judges do with this one.
We had a couple other things we wanted to talk about today, but we're running out of time. So I'm going to use that redistricting conversation to let everyone know that we're actually hosting a special virtual conversation with two panelists moderated by Brian on March 1st about redistricting and the impact it's going to have on our state. This is reserved for SBAM's VIP and elite members. So if you're interested and you're not at that level, we can certainly talk about how you can become a VIP or elite member. But it's just an example of some of the great programming we do provide to various levels of membership. So that's all we have for you today. We will see you back here on Thursday.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you on Thursday.